We're having a conversation with Mary O'Grady from the Wall Street Journal. Mary, when one sees the picture of Latin America, one who is in love with freedom feels something here. And I heard that you have a perspective which points towards the possibility that nothing is, it is not as bad as it looks.
Yeah, I would say that there's more to be optimistic about than you generally hear in the mainstream press. I think what's happening in the region is there's a certain bifurcation where some countries are certainly going backwards, and really they're in such serious political trouble that I think it'll take them a long time to get out. That's Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, probably Nicaragua as well. But I think there's another group of countries that have experimented with openness, more trade openness, and that's changed a lot the views of the people. And they're more interested in engaging with the rest of the world. And they haven't, these countries that have made some progress, both institutionally and in terms of policies, haven't gone back so easily, even with this recession. And I think that would be Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. I think that all of those countries have made gains in the last 15 years, and they're holding on to them somewhat. They realize, for example, from a macroeconomic perspective, that they can't just spend money and print money. I mean, they've learned that lesson, and they're being really pretty careful about how they deal with the recession. They're fighting to keep markets open in this environment, which is also a very good sign. I think at the micro level, they still need to do a lot of work, but I think it's more hopeful than you generally hear.
And is it a matter of institutions or a matter of the people who are in charge in those countries?
Well, it's certainly a matter of the institutions. And for example, you know, you see someone from the very hard left originally, like the president of Brazil, Lula. And, you know, he's not suggesting that he's going to run for a third term. That's completely ruled out. And I think that's a sign that institutionally Brazil has, you know, made these rules and is not going to waver from them. And even though he's been pretty popular and he's been very pragmatic, he's you know, defended the central bank governor who has tried to defend the value of the Brazilian real. And I think those are all signs that institutions are starting to take hold in these countries, and that the population approves of that they no longer think we just want our strong man and we want him to stay there forever. They're accepting the fact that, okay, he's run out of his term limits and he has to go.
And how do you see the role of the U.S. vis-a-vis Latin America? Maybe not as a whole, but maybe having this differentiation in mind?
Well, I am a little bit troubled by a lot of U.S. policy with respect to the region. In particular, the way that, for example, the war on drugs influences institutions. Because as you say, I mean, it's more important that the institutions are sound. We can't rely on individuals. And something like the war on drugs sort of is very corrosive. It eats away at institutions because there's a lot of bribery and corruption and money being passed around and so forth. That weakens the framework that we have for the rule of law. And it's especially difficult in the judicial area, in the place where, you know, people are supposed to be held accountable for their actions. And I think a lot of that comes from the war on drugs. You know, the U.S. doesn't want drugs, and the government doesn't want drugs there. But apparently, there are a lot of people there who want drugs. That's what we call demand in economics. So that is creating, with the prohibition, it means a lot of money goes into poor countries with very fragile institutions. And that's troubling to me, because I think that the institutional stability of these countries is not, we haven't won yet. We're building them, and they're frail, and they could be knocked down easily. Then you have this great rush of money coming in, potentially bribing and corrupting and undermining the little bit that's been built. That's troubling to me. I think also U.S. policy on trade is potentially at a juncture where some bad things could happen, and I think we've already seen it with Mexico. The U.S. government closed the southern border to Mexican 18-wheelers, you know, large trucks. And it's supposed to be open under the North American Free Trade Agreement. So Mexico retaliated, and they put higher tariffs on a number of products, I think 90 products. That's a trade war, you know, and we do not want to start having trade wars, particularly in a recessionary environment. So these are things coming from the U.S. that I think are going to be costly to, again, countries that have frail institutions and are just trying to become more engaged in the world and more open.
And this brings me to the issue of immigration. Is the policy of immigration changing or affecting the relationship?
Well, on immigration, I'm not so concerned, primarily for two reasons. I think of problems as long-term problems. I think it's an immediate problem, but I think in a longer-term sense, the relationship with Mexico and a lot of the countries in this Central American isthmus is, in terms of immigration, has a lot to do with the demographics. And for example, Mexico had a very large population of 20 to 30-year-olds moving through. Of course, they're going to begin to age. And so that pressure of immigration will go down. When the U.S. economy starts to slow down, immigrants go back. I mean, they're there to work, and they tend to go back. So I think the real pressure cooker that we had with immigration is not going to be such a big issue in the next few years. I think it's unfortunate the way the U.S. handled the immigration issue during the early part of this decade. I think that immigrants were considered part of the problem, and I think, if we look at it from an economic perspective, they're actually an asset to the country. And the U.S. needed that labor, and that's why they came, and that's why we invited them to come. And then at some point, we said, we don't want you anymore. And of course, people had made their lives there. So it was a very unfortunate event, but I don't think it's going to be such a high-profile issue this year or next year anyway. And I think eventually, as I say, the demographics will change so that I think there won't be such a mass migration. The real answer, of course, is development in Mexico, and people stay home. And that's why I'm more troubled about trade and things that undermine the economic and institutional development. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing these ideas with us, and thank you.